A storm rages over a sleepy coastal town, and beneath a flickering streetlight, a man who fixes broken things finds a girl with secrets heavier than the rain. She's running from a past she won't name, from a fortune she doesn't want, and he's hiding from a grief he can't outrun. Together, they'll mend more than lanterns. They'll light a path through the dark. But when shadows from her old life close in, will their fragile flame survive? Dive into The Keeper of the Flame, a tale of love, courage, and the miracles kindness can spark. If you're ready to uncover their story, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single spark, consider hitting that subscribe button. It's the best way to stay lit up with every chapter as it unfolds. Now let's step into the storm. Struggling single dad sheltered a homeless girl, unaware she was a secret billionaire. Heiress. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Willow Cove, a sleepy coastal town in Oregon, where the ocean's breath was both a lullaby and a warning. It was late November, and the rain fell in sheets, drumming against the tin roof of Caleb Marshall's workshop. At 43, Caleb was a man who wore his years like the weathered wood of his workbench, solid, unyielding, but chipped at the edges by time and loss. His hands, rough and calloused from years of fixing things, moved with quiet precision as he tinkered with an old lantern, its glass cracked but still glowing faintly under his care. Caleb lived alone now, in a modest house attached to the workshop where he repaired everything from broken clocks to boat engines. 5 years ago, he'd lost Ellen, his wife of 15 years, to a cancer that crept in silently and left too quickly for goodbyes. Since then, he'd buried himself in work, letting the hum of tools drown out the silence she'd left behind. The townsfolk called him the Fixer, not just for his skill with machines, but for the way he'd show up unasked to mend a neighbor's fence or haul firewood for the elderly widow down the road. He never said much about it. To Caleb, kindness wasn't a choice. It was a reflex, a way to keep the darkness at bay. Tonight, though, the darkness pressed closer. The storm had knocked out half the town's power, and Caleb's workshop flickered with the dim light of a single kerosene lamp. He glanced at the clock, 10:47 p.m., and muttered to himself, "Time to call it." He pulled on his raincoat, a faded green thing Ellen had bought him years ago, and stepped out into the gale. The street was a blur of rain and shadows, the streetlights dead under the storm's wrath. That's when he saw her. She was huddled beneath the overhang of the old bait shop across the street, a slight figure wrapped in a soaked hoodie that clung to her like a second skin. Her knees were drawn up to her chest, her hands clutching a tattered duffel bag as if it were her only anchor. The wind whipped her dark hair across her face, but Caleb caught a glimpse of her eyes, wide, haunted, and fixed on the ground. She couldn't have been more than 25, maybe 26. Too young, he thought, to be out here alone in a storm like this. He hesitated. The sensible thing would be to keep walking, head home, and let the night sort itself out. He wasn't a hero, just a man who fixed things. But something in her stillness, the way she didn't even shiver despite the cold, tugged at a corner of his heart he'd locked away. Ellen's voice echoed in his mind, soft and teasing. "You've got a soft spot a mile wide, Caleb Marshall." He sighed, shoulders slumping as if surrendering to her memory, and crossed the street. "Hey," he called over the wind, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You okay?" She flinched, her head snapping up. Up close, her face was pale, streaked with rain and something else. Tears, maybe, or just exhaustion. She didn't answer, just stared at him with those eyes like a deer caught in headlights. Caleb raised his hands, palms out, to show he meant no harm. "Look, it's a hell of a night to be out here. I've got a place just up the road. Dry roof, warm fire, no strings." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For a moment he thought she'd bolt. Then slowly she nodded, clutching her bag tighter as she stood. She was shorter than he'd expected, barely reaching his shoulder, and her steps were unsteady as she followed him. Caleb kept his distance, leading her back to the house in silence, the rain hammering down like a curtain between them. Inside, the warmth of the wood stove greeted them, its crackling a stark contrast to the storm outside. Caleb pointed to a chair by the fire. Sit. I'll get you something dry. He disappeared into the bedroom, returning with an old flannel shirt and a pair of Ellen's sweatpants, still folded in a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Bathroom's down the hall. Change if you want. She took the clothes with trembling hands, murmuring a faint, "Thank you," before slipping away. Caleb busied himself in the kitchen, heating a pot of soup, chicken noodle, the kind Ellen used to make. When the girl returned, she looked less like a drowned stray and more like a person, though her eyes still carried that shadowed weight. She sat by the fire, the oversized shirt swallowing her frame, and wrapped her hands around the mug of soup he handed her. "I'm Caleb," he said, settling into the armchair across from her. "You don't have to tell me anything if you don't want. Just eat, warm up, stay till the storm passes." She sipped the soup, then spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I'm Nora." A pause, then. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You're not," he said simply. "Storms bring all kinds of things to shore. Doesn't mean they're trouble." Nora's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. For the first time, Caleb noticed the faintest spark in her eyes, something alive, buried deep. He didn't press her for more. Instead, he picked up the cracked lantern from his workbench, its glass glinting in the firelight. "Found this washed up on the beach a while back," he said, more to fill the silence than anything else. "Figured I'd fix it. Give it a second chance." She watched him work, her gaze lingering on his hands as they carefully fitted a new pane of glass. "You fix a lot of things," she said, almost a question. "Try to," he replied. "Sometimes it's easier to fix what's broken out there than what's in here." He tapped his chest lightly, then caught himself, surprised at his own honesty. Nora didn't respond, but her eyes softened, and for a moment the room felt smaller, warmer, as if the storm outside had retreated just a step. Caleb didn't know it yet, but that flicker of connection, the quiet trust in her glance, the weight of her presence, would soon become the spark that reignited something he'd thought was lost forever. Outside, the wind raged on, but inside, a tiny flame had begun to burn. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it grew fiercer as the night stretched on, rattling the windows of Caleb Marshall's small house like an angry guest demanding entry. Inside, the wood stove cast a steady glow across the living room, painting flickering shadows on the walls. Caleb sat in his armchair, pretending to focus on the lantern he'd been repairing, but his eyes kept drifting to Nora. She was still by the fire, knees tucked under the oversized flannel shirt, her damp hair drying into soft waves. The mug of soup rested empty in her lap, her fingers tracing its rim absently. He didn't know what to make of her yet. She was a stranger, a wisp of a girl blown in by the wind. But there was something about her, a quiet resilience, maybe, or the way she held herself like she was bracing for the next blow, that stirred an old instinct in him. Caleb had spent years fixing things for others, but this felt different. This wasn't a broken gearbox or a splintered chair. This was a person, and people were messy, unpredictable. He'd learned that the hard way with Ellen's illness, watching her slip through his fingers, no matter how hard he tried to hold on. "You don't have to stay up," he said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, careful not to startle her. "There's a spare room down the hall. Bed's made. You can crash there till morning." Nora looked up, her eyes catching the firelight. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, and there was a firmness in her tone that surprised him. "You've already done enough." Caleb shrugged, setting the lantern aside. "It's no trouble. Storm like this, no one should be out there. Besides, I'm not sleeping much tonight anyway." He nodded toward the window, where rain lashed the glass in relentless waves. "Might as well keep an eye on things." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. Thank you, Caleb." Her voice softened on his name, and for a fleeting moment he felt a pang, something warm and unfamiliar, like a memory trying to surface. He pushed it down, standing to stoke the fire. "Get some rest," he said, turning his back to her. "I'll be here if you need anything." Nora rose, clutching the duffel bag she hadn't let out of her sight since she'd arrived. She paused at the hallway entrance, glancing back at him. "You're a good man," she said quietly, almost too quiet to hear over the crackling logs. Then she was gone, her footsteps fading into the house's stillness. Caleb stared into the flames, her words echoing in his head. A good man. He wasn't so sure about that. Good men didn't let their wives fade away in hospital beds. Good men didn't spend years hiding from the world, pretending oil-stained hands and fixed engines could fill the hole inside. But Nora's voice had carried no judgment, just a simple observation, and it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he stayed by the fire, listening to the storm and the creaks of the old house settling around him. Around 2 a.m., he heard a sound, a muffled thud from the spare room. Instinct kicked in, and he was on his feet before he could think twice, moving silently down the hall. The door was ajar, and in the dim light spilling from the living room, he saw Nora kneeling on the floor, her bag spilled open. A few clothes, a battered notebook, and something glinting, a silver locket, lay scattered around her. She was trembling, her hands fumbling to gather it all back. "You all right?" Caleb asked, keeping his voice steady. She froze, then looked up, her face a mix of panic and shame. I'm fine. I just dropped it. Sorry if I woke you." "You didn't." He stepped closer, crouching to help her. His fingers brushed the locket, and he paused. It was ornate, heavy, the kind of thing that didn't belong in a duffel bag of a girl on the run. He handed it to her without a word, but their eyes met, and he saw something shift in hers. Fear, maybe, or a secret clawing to get out. "It's nothing," she said quickly, shoving it back into the bag. "Just something old." Caleb nodded, standing. "No need to explain. Get some sleep, Nora." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Why do you do it?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Help people like me? You don't even know me." He didn't turn around right away. The question hung there, heavy and raw, and for a moment he wasn't sure how to answer. When he finally faced her, his expression was softer than he meant it to be. "Because I couldn't help someone once," he said. "Someone who mattered more than anything. And I promised myself I'd never walk away again if I had the chance to do something." Nora's gaze held his, searching, and for the first time, he noticed the faint lines around her eyes, too deep for someone so young. She didn't say anything more, just nodded, and he left her there, closing the door behind him. Back by the fire, Caleb sank into his chair, his mind churning. That locket, it wasn't nothing. He'd seen craftsmanship like that before, years ago, when he'd fixed a display case for a jeweler in Portland. It was the kind of piece that cost more than his house, maybe his whole life savings. Who was she really? A runaway with a story she wasn't telling? He shook his head, trying to dismiss it. She'd be gone by morning, and that would be that. But as the night wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling that Nora wasn't just a stranger passing through. There was a weight to her presence, a pull he couldn't explain. He picked up the lantern again, running his thumb over the new glass he'd fitted earlier. It glowed steady now. No cracks, no flaws, just a quiet, enduring light. Outside, the storm began to ease, the wind softening to a murmur. Inside, Caleb sat alone, wrestling with questions he wasn't ready to ask, and a flicker of hope he wasn't ready to name. Nora's words, "You're a good man," lingered like a melody he couldn't unhear, and for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth fixing inside himself. Morning broke over Willow Cove with a fragile calm, the kind that follows a storm's retreat. The sky was a bruised gray, streaked with hints of gold, where the sun fought to pierce through. Caleb stood at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the world settle. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a scattering of branches and puddles that mirrored the clouds. He hadn't slept, not really, just a few restless hours in the armchair, his mind tangled with thoughts of Nora and that locket glinting in the dark. The house was quiet, save for the faint drip of a leak he'd need to patch later. He figured she'd be gone by now, slipped out before dawn like a ghost who'd never been there. Part of him hoped she had. It'd be simpler that way. No questions, no complications. But when he turned from the window, he saw her standing in the hallway, still in Ellen's old flannel shirt, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. "Thought you'd be halfway to the highway by now," Caleb said, keeping his tone light. He set his mug down, leaning against the counter. Nora shifted her weight, her eyes flicking to the floor. I was going to, she said, but I didn't want to leave without saying thank you. Properly, I mean. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath it, like she was testing unfamiliar ground. No need for that. Caleb waved a hand, brushing it off. Coffee's on if you want some. Then you can be on your way. He didn't mean it to sound dismissive, but he caught the slight flinch in her expression and regretted it instantly. She nodded, dropping her bag by the door before stepping into the kitchen. He poured her a mug, black and steaming, and slid it across the counter. She wrapped her hands around it, the warmth seeming to anchor her. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the kind that wasn't awkward but heavy with things unsaid. You fix lanterns, Nora said at last, glancing toward the workshop visible through the open door. Why lanterns? Caleb paused, caught off guard by the question. He took a sip of his coffee, buying time. Started with Ellen, my wife, he said finally. She loved them, said they were like little promises, lighting up the dark. After she was gone, I kept at it. Guess it's my way of holding on to something. Nora's gaze softened, and she nodded like she understood more than he'd expected. That's beautiful, she said. Most people just throw broken things away. Not me, he replied. If it can be fixed, it's worth the effort. He met her eyes then, and something passed between them. A flicker of recognition, maybe, or just the quiet ache of two people who'd seen their share of brokenness. She smiled faintly, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it changed her face, lit it up, like a lantern finding its flame. You're good at it, she said. Fixing things, I mean. I saw how you handled that one last night. Steady hands. Caleb shrugged, but her words landed deeper than he let on. Takes practice. You ever try it? Me? She laughed, a short, surprised sound. I'm better at breaking things, trust me. There was a bitterness there, quickly masked, and she looked away, sipping her coffee. He didn't push. Instead, he grabbed a rag from the counter and wiped his hands. A habit, even though they were clean. Well, if you're sticking around for a minute, I've got a job today. Big lantern down by the pier. Storm knocked it out. Could use an extra pair of hands if you're up for it. Nora blinked, clearly not expecting the offer. I don't know anything about lanterns, she said, hesitant. Don't need to. Just hold stuff. Hand me tools. I'll do the rest. He kept his tone casual, but inside he was surprised at himself. Why was he asking her to stay? He didn't need help, not really. But the thought of her walking out that door, disappearing into whatever she was running from, felt wrong. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, I can do that. An hour later, they were at the pier, the wind still sharp but kinder than the night before. The lantern was a beast, 6 feet tall, rusted from years of salt air, its wiring fried by the storm. Caleb climbed a ladder, toolbox in hand, while Nora stood below, passing up pliers and screws as he called for them. She was quick, attentive, her movements precise in a way that made him wonder again about that locket, about who she'd been before she washed up here. Hold this steady, he said, handing her a flashlight as he rewired the base. Their fingers brushed, and she pulled back slightly, but not before he caught the faintest flush on her cheeks. He pretended not to notice, focusing on the task. You've done this a lot, she said, watching him twist the wires with ease. Years of it, he replied. Started with small stuff, clocks, radios. Lanterns came later. Keeps me busy. Busy's good, she said softly. Keeps the ghosts away. He glanced down at her, startled by the weight in her words. Before he could respond, a voice cut through the air. Gruff, familiar. Caleb Marshall, you old dog. Fixing the world again? It was Pete Grayson, a fisherman who'd known Caleb since they were kids. He ambled over, his weathered face creased with a grin, but his eyes narrowed as they landed on Nora. Who's this? He asked, not unkindly. Nora, Caleb said, climbing down. Helping me out today. Pete tipped his cap, studying her. Good to see new faces. You from around here? No, Nora said quickly, her voice tight. Just passing through. Pete nodded, but there was a flicker of something in his expression. Recognition, maybe? Before he turned back to Caleb. Well, don't let me interrupt. That lantern's been dark too long. He clapped Caleb's shoulder and walked off, leaving an odd tension in his wake. Caleb looked at Nora, who'd gone pale, her hands gripping the flashlight too hard. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, forcing a smile. "Just cold." He didn't buy it, but he let it go. They finished the job in silence, and when he flipped the switch, the lantern flared to life, casting a warm golden glow over the pier. The sight of it, broken one day, shining the next, eased something in him, and he caught Nora staring at it too, her eyes bright with an emotion he couldn't name. "See?" he said. "Worth the effort." She nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. And as they walked back to the house, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that Pete had seen something in her, something she wasn't ready to share. Whatever it was, it hung between them now, a shadow neither of them could outrun. The late afternoon sun hung low over Willow Cove, casting long shadows across the gravel path leading back to Caleb's house. The air smelled of salt and damp earth, a lingering gift from the storm. Caleb walked beside Nora, his toolbox swinging lightly in his hand, the newly lit pier lantern still glowing in his mind like a small victory. She was quiet, her steps measured, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder again. He'd expected her to leave after the job. Her thank you that morning had felt like a goodbye. But here she was, still beside him, her presence both comforting and confounding. "You didn't have to stick around," he said, breaking the silence as they reached the porch. "That lantern was more than enough thanks." Nora stopped, her hand resting on the railing. "I know," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I just didn't feel like running yet." She looked up at him, and for a moment, her guard slipped, just enough for him to see the weariness beneath her calm. "Is that okay?" Caleb studied her, the way her eyes searched his for something he couldn't quite name. "Yeah," he said finally. "It's okay." He pushed the door open, letting her in first. "Hungry? I've got some stew in the fridge. Nothing fancy, but it'll warm you up." She nodded, setting her bag by the door. A small gesture, but it struck him as a sign she wasn't planning to bolt anytime soon. He heated the stew, beef and potatoes, a recipe Ellen's mother had passed down, while Nora hovered near the kitchen counter, watching him with a curiosity he hadn't noticed before. "You cook a lot?" she asked, leaning against the edge. "Enough to get by," he said, stirring the pot. "Ellen was the real cook. I just picked up what I could after." He trailed off, the weight of her name settling between them. Nora didn't press. Instead, she reached for a stack of mismatched bowls on the shelf, setting the table with a quiet efficiency that surprised him. "My mom used to make stew," she said, almost to herself. "Hers had carrots, too many carrots." She smiled faintly, a memory flickering across her face. "Sounds like a good mom," Caleb said, ladling the stew into the bowls. "She was." Nora's voice tightened, and she turned away, busying herself with finding spoons. He didn't push, but the past tense hung there, a thread he didn't dare pull. They ate in companionable silence, the clink of spoons against ceramic blending with the soft hum of the wood stove. It felt oddly normal, like a scene from a life he'd almost forgotten how to live. After dinner, Caleb led her to the workshop, a cluttered space filled with tools, half-finished projects, and the faint scent of oil and pine. He'd been meaning to clean it up, but tonight he had a different idea. "Ever made something from scratch?" he asked, pulling a box of wooden scraps from under the bench. Nora shook her head. "Not really, I'm not exactly handy." "Doesn't matter, I'll show you." He handed her a piece of cedar, smooth and fragrant. "We'll start small, a box maybe, something to keep stuff in." She hesitated, then took the wood, her fingers brushing his. "Why a box?" "Everyone needs a place to put things," he said, meeting her eyes. "Memories, secrets, whatever you carry." Her breath hitched, just for a second, and he wondered if he'd overstepped. But she nodded, sitting across from him as he guided her through sanding the edges, his hands steadying hers when the wood slipped. Her focus was intense, almost fierce, and he found himself watching her more than the project, watching the way her brow furrowed, the way her lips parted slightly as she worked. "You're a natural," he said after a while. when the first piece was smooth and even. She laughed, a real laugh this time, short and bright. "You're a good liar." "Nah, just a good teacher." He grinned, the first real smile he'd felt in days, and it startled him how easy it came. They kept at it, the box taking shape under their hands until a sharp knock at the front door jolted them both. Caleb frowned, wiping his hands on a rag as he stood. "Stay here," he said, though he wasn't sure why. It wasn't like Willow Cove was a hotbed of danger. He opened the door to find Pete Grayson standing there, his fisherman's cap pulled low, a strange urgency in his eyes. "Caleb," Pete said, his voice low. "Need a word. Private." Caleb stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "What's up?" Pete glanced toward the house, then back at him. "That girl, Nora. I know her face. Seen it before. Years back. She's not just some drifter, Cal." Caleb's stomach tightened. "What are you saying?" Pete pulled a crumpled photo from his jacket, a grainy shot from an old newspaper, showing a younger Nora, maybe 18, standing beside a man in a suit. The headline was half torn, but the words "Grayson Heiress" were clear as day. "Found this in my boat shed last night," Pete said. "Thought it was junk till I saw her today. She's Eleanor Grayson, California. Old man Grayson's granddaughter. Went missing after he died. Family's been looking for her ever since." Caleb stared at the photo, his mind racing. Grayson, the Graysons. Timber barons turned real estate tycoons, worth millions, maybe billions. He'd heard the stories growing up, but they were distant, like legends from another world. "You sure?" he asked, though the resemblance was uncanny. The same dark hair, the same guarded eyes. "Dead sure," Pete said. "Question is, what's she doing here? And why's she pretending she's nobody?" Caleb handed the photo back, his jaw tight. "Don't know, but it's her business, Pete, not ours." Pete raised an eyebrow. "You're a soft touch, Marshall. Always have been. Just watch yourself, all right? People like that, they bring trouble." Caleb didn't answer, just watched Pete trudge back into the dusk. When he stepped inside, Nora was still at the workbench, sanding the cedar, oblivious to the storm brewing in his head. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the girl from the photo overlaid with the one in front of him, her hands steady but her shoulders tense. "You all right?" she asked, glancing up. "Yeah," he lied, forcing a smile. "Just an old friend checking in." She nodded, returning to her work, and Caleb sat back down, his mind a tangle of questions. Eleanor Grayson, a runaway heiress in his workshop, building a box with him like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't know what to do with that, didn't know if he wanted to. But as the evening wore on, the wood taking shape between them, he couldn't deny the pull he felt, the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, she was here to fix something too. The night settled over Willow Cove like a heavy quilt, the kind that warms but weighs you down. Inside Caleb's workshop, the air hummed with the soft scrape of sandpaper against wood and the occasional crackle from the living room stove. The cedar box Nora and Caleb had been crafting sat half-finished on the bench, its edges smooth, but its purpose still unclear. A reflection, Caleb thought, of the strange, unspoken thing growing between them. He watched her sand the lid, her movements deliberate, almost meditative, and wondered how someone with hands so steady could carry a past so unsteady. Pete's revelation gnawed at him. Eleanor Grayson. The name didn't fit the girl in front of him, with her borrowed flannel and quiet laugh. He decided not to ask, not yet. She'd tell him when she was ready, or she wouldn't, and either way, he wasn't in the business of prying open someone else's wounds. His own were enough to handle, but the photo lingered in his mind, a grainy ghost he couldn't shake. "You're staring," Nora said suddenly, not looking up from her work. Her tone was light, teasing, but it caught him off guard. Caleb blinked, then chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Caught me, just making sure you don't sand that thing into dust." She smirked, brushing sawdust from her hands. "I'm not that bad. You're a good teacher, remember?" "Guess so." He picked up a chisel, turning it over in his hands. "You're picking it up fast, though. Quicker than I did." Maybe I've got a knack, she said, but her smile faltered and she looked away, focusing on the box like it held all her answers. Caleb let the silence stretch, sensing the shift in her mood. He'd seen it before. Ellen used to get that look when the pain crept in, a quiet retreat into herself. "Something on your mind?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. Nora hesitated, her fingers pausing on the wood. "Just thinking about home," she said finally. "Or what used to be home." He nodded, not pushing, but leaving the door open. She took a breath, then spoke again, her words slow, like she was pulling them from deep water. "I grew up in a big house, too big, full of people who cared more about what I could give them than who I was. After my mom died, it got worse. I stuck around for a while, thinking I could fix it. Fix them. But you can't fix people who don't want to be fixed." Caleb listened, his chest tightening. Her story wasn't the whole truth. He knew that now, thanks to Pete. But it was a piece of it, raw and real. "Sounds lonely," he said. It was. She met his eyes then, and there was a vulnerability there that hit him hard. "I left because I had to, but sometimes I wonder if I ran from the wrong things." He set the chisel down, leaning forward. "Running's not always cowardice, Nora. Sometimes it's survival. Took me a long time to figure that out after Ellen." She tilted her head, studying him. "What did you run from?" "Me, mostly," he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. "Guilt, the what-ifs. Kept busy so I wouldn't have to face it. Still do some days." Her gaze softened and she reached out, almost touching his hand before pulling back. "You don't seem like someone who's running now." "Maybe not," he said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. "Maybe I'm just tired of it." The air between them thickened, charged with something neither could name. Before it could settle, a sharp clatter broke the moment. Nora's duffel bag, left by the workshop door, had tipped over, spilling its contents across the floor. Clothes, that battered notebook, and the silver locket tumbled out, catching the light. Nora scrambled to her feet, her face paling. "Sorry, I'll get it," she said, her voice tight. Caleb stood to help, but as he bent down, the locket landed near his boot. He picked it up, its weight heavy in his palm, and this time he couldn't ignore the craftsmanship. The intricate filigree, the tiny clasp engraved with a G. "Nora," he said, holding it out to her, "this isn't just something old, is it?" She froze, her hand halfway to the pile. "It's nothing," she said too quickly. "Just a trinket. Trinkets don't look like this." He kept his tone even, but his eyes searched hers. "You don't have to tell me, but don't lie. Not about this." Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he thought she'd shut down. Then she took the locket, clutching it like it burned. "It's from my grandfather," she said, her voice barely audible. "He gave it to me before he died. Said it was a promise, that I'd always have a place. I kept it because it's all I have left of him." Caleb nodded, sensing the truth in her words, and the gaps she wasn't filling. "He must have been a good man," he said. "He was." Her eyes glistened and she turned away, shoving the locket back into the bag. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Don't be," he cut in. "We've all got pieces we carry. Doesn't make you less welcome here." She looked at him then, gratitude mingling with something deeper. Trust, maybe, or the start of it. They cleaned up the spill in silence, but the weight of her confession lingered, a crack in the glass of her carefully built walls. Later, as they finished the box, Caleb noticed her hands trembling slightly. Not from cold, but from the effort of holding herself together. He didn't comment, just handed her a screwdriver to fasten the hinges, their fingers brushing again. This time she didn't pull away, and he felt a warmth spread through him, steady and sure, like a flame finding its wick. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the workshop windows, but inside, the space felt smaller, softer. Caleb didn't know the full story yet. Eleanor Grayson, heiress on the run. But he knew this. Nora wasn't just passing through anymore. She was leaving marks, subtle but real, on the wood, on the air, on him. And as they stepped back to admire the finished box, simple, sturdy, a thing made together, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was leaving marks on her too. The days slipped into a quiet rhythm in Willow Cove, the kind of rhythm that sneaks up on you and feels like home before you realize it. By the end of the week, Nora had been with Caleb for 5 days, longer than either of them had expected. The storm had passed, but she stayed, her duffel bag still by the door, like a promise she hadn't decided to keep or break. Caleb didn't ask her to leave. He didn't want to. Her presence filled the house in ways he hadn't anticipated. Soft footsteps in the morning, the clatter of dishes being washed unasked, the way she'd hum under her breath while sanding wood in the workshop. It was a melody he hadn't known he'd missed. They'd finished the cedar box that first night, and now it sat on the kitchen counter, holding odds and ends. Keys, a few screws, a pencil stub. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. A tangible thread tying them together. Caleb found himself looking forward to the evenings, when they'd sit by the stove or tinker in the workshop, trading stories that grew longer, deeper, with each passing day. He told her about Ellen's laugh, how it could light up a room, and the time he'd built her a lantern for their 10th anniversary. Nora shared fragments too, her mother's garden, the way the roses smelled after rain, but she stopped short of the bigger picture, and he didn't push. Not yet. That morning the air was crisp, the sky a clear blue that made the ocean sparkle like glass. Caleb stood on the porch, sipping coffee, when Nora joined him, her hair pulled back, Ellen's old sweatpants still hanging loose on her frame. "Nice day," she said, shielding her eyes against the sun. "Best we've had in a while," he replied. "Thought I'd head down to the beach. Check the tide pools, see what the storm washed up. You in?" Her face brightened. "Yeah, I'd like that." They walked the half-mile to the shore, the crunch of gravel giving way to the soft give of sand. The beach was littered with driftwood and seaweed, treasures of the storm scattered like forgotten gifts. Caleb carried a bucket, an old habit from years of scavenging with Ellen, while Nora wandered ahead, her steps lighter than he'd seen them. She bent to pick up a shell, turning it over in her hands, and he caught himself watching her again. The way the light caught her hair, the quiet wonder in her expression. "Find anything good?" he called, closing the distance. She held up the shell, a perfect spiral, pearlescent in the sunlight. "This reminds me of something my mom used to say. Even the smallest things hold beauty if you look close enough." Caleb smiled. She was right. He dropped a piece of sea glass into the bucket, green and smooth from years of tumbling. Ellen loved this stuff, said it was proof the ocean could heal anything, given time. Nora's eyes softened. "You miss her a lot, don't you?" "Every day," he said, his voice steady but thick. "But it's not all pain anymore. More like a warm ache, something I carry." She nodded like she understood, and they kept walking, the waves lapping at their boots. For a while it was just them and the sea, a peace Caleb hadn't felt in years. Then Nora stopped, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. He followed her line of sight and saw it. A figure near the cliffs watching them. A man, tall and broad, in a dark coat that looked out of place against the rugged shore. "Caleb," Nora said, her voice tight, "we should go." He frowned, glancing between her and the figure. "You know him?" "No," she said too quickly, turning back toward the house. "I just don't like being watched." He didn't buy it, but he followed her, the bucket swinging heavier in his hand. The man didn't move, just stood there, a shadow against the rocks until they were out of sight. Back at the house, Nora busied herself in the kitchen, rinsing the shell under the tap like nothing had happened. But Caleb saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands shook just enough to betray her. "All right," he said, leaning against the doorway. "What's going on?" She didn't look up. "Nothing's going on." "Nora." His tone was firm but gentle. "I'm not blind. That guy spooked you. If you're in trouble, I'd rather know now than find out the hard way." She set the shell down, her fingers gripping the counter. "It's not your problem, Caleb. You've done enough." "Maybe I want it to be my problem," he said, surprising himself. "You're not just some stray I picked up off the street anymore. You're here, with me. That means something." Her eyes met his, wide and searching, and for a moment he thought she'd tell him everything. Eleanor Grayson, the locket, the life she'd left behind. But then the front door banged open, and Pete Grayson stormed in, his face flushed with urgency. "Caleb, we've got trouble," Pete said, breathless. "Some suits just rolled into town, asking about a girl, dark hair, mid-20s. Showed your picture around too, like they knew she was with you." Nora stiffened, her breath catching. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Who are they?" "Don't know," Pete said. "But they're not locals. Look like money, big money. Said they're family, but I didn't buy it. Told them I hadn't seen her, but they're sniffing around the pier now." Caleb turned to Nora, his voice low. "This them? The ones you ran from?" She didn't answer, but her silence was enough. Her hands clenched into fists, and she looked at him with something close to panic. "I didn't mean for this," she whispered. "I thought I'd gotten away." "Getaway's not over yet," Caleb said, his mind racing. He grabbed his coat from the hook. "Pete, stall them if they come this way. Nora, pack your stuff. We're leaving." "Leaving?" She blinked, startled. "Where?" "Somewhere they won't look," he said. "I've got a cabin up the coast. Old hunting spot. No one knows it but me and Pete. We'll figure this out there." Pete nodded, already heading out. "I'll buy you time. Go." Nora hesitated, then grabbed her bag, her movements quick and shaky. Caleb led her to his truck out back, the engine rumbling to life as dusk settled over the town. He didn't know who was after her or why, but he knew one thing. She wasn't facing it alone. As they pulled onto the coastal road, the headlights cutting through the growing dark, he glanced at her, pale, resolute, clutching that damn locket, and felt a surge of something fierce and protective he hadn't felt since Ellen. The tide had turned, and whatever came next, they'd meet it together. The truck rumbled along the winding coastal road, its headlights carving a narrow path through the deepening night. Caleb kept his eyes on the pavement, the familiar curves of Highway 101 unfolding like an old map in his mind. Beside him, Nora sat silent, her hands clasped around the locket, her duffel bag wedged between her feet. The air in the cab was thick with tension, the kind that builds when words are too heavy to speak but too urgent to hold back. He didn't know who was after her, family, as Pete had said, or something worse. But he knew she was scared, and that was enough to keep his foot steady on the gas. The cabin was 30 miles north of Willow Cove, tucked deep in a stand of Douglas firs where the ocean's roar faded to a whisper. Caleb hadn't been there in years, not since he and Ellen used to escape for quiet weekends, fishing or just sitting by the fire. It was a simple place. One room, a stone fireplace, a porch overlooking a creek. No electricity, no phone line, just a sanctuary off the grid. He'd kept it a secret, even from most of the town, and now it felt like the only safe harbor left. They arrived just past 9, the truck's tires crunching over pine needles as Caleb pulled into the overgrown drive. The cabin loomed dark against the trees, its windows blank and waiting. He cut the engine, and the silence rushed in, broken only by the faint chirp of crickets. "We're here," he said, glancing at Nora. "Not much, but it's ours for now." She nodded, her face pale in the dashboard light. "It's perfect," she said, her voice small but steady. They stepped out into the cool night, the scent of pine sharp and clean. Caleb grabbed a lantern from the truck bed, an old kerosene one he'd restored years ago, and lit it, casting a warm glow over the porch. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and time, but it was dry, intact. He set the lantern on a rickety table, then knelt by the fireplace, stacking logs from a pile in the corner. Nora watched, hesitant, then dropped her bag and joined him, handing him kindling without being asked. "Teamwork," he said, offering a half-smile as the first flames caught. "Guess so," she replied, and the ghost of a smile flickered back. The fire grew, chasing the chill from the room, and they settled on a threadbare couch, the lantern flickering between them. Caleb pulled a thermos of coffee from his pack, prepared that morning, still warm, and poured it into 2 tin mugs. Nora took hers gratefully, wrapping her hands around it as if it were a lifeline. "All right," he said after a sip, his tone gentle but firm. "I'm not asking for everything, but I need enough to know what we're dealing with. Who's after you, Nora, and why?" She stared into the fire, her jaw tightening. "I should have told you sooner," she said finally. I just, didn't want you dragged into this." "Too late for that," he said, not unkindly. "I'm in it now. So talk." She took a shaky breath, then began. "My real name's Eleanor Grayson. My grandfather was Henry Grayson, owned half the timberland up north, turned it into a real estate empire. When he died, he left it all to me. Not my dad, not my uncles, me. Said I was the only one with a heart like his." Her voice cracked and she clutched the locket tighter. "But I didn't want it. The money, the power, it ruined them. My dad turned cruel. My uncles fought like dogs over scraps. I stuck around after Mom passed, thinking I could hold it together. But they wouldn't let me breathe, so I ran." Caleb listened, piecing it together with Pete's photo. "And they're still looking," he said. "Yeah." She swallowed hard. "The family Pete saw, they're not here to hug me and take me home. My dad hired people, private investigators, maybe worse, to drag me back. If I don't sign over the estate, they'll lose everything. They think I'm hiding to spite them, but I just want to be free." He leaned back, processing. An heiress in his cabin, running from a fortune most would kill for. It was a lot, too much maybe, but her fear was real, and that grounded him. "You're safe here," he said. "No one knows this place, not even the suits in their fancy cars." "For how long?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "I can't keep running forever, Caleb. And I can't keep pulling you into this." "You're not pulling me," he said, his voice rough with conviction. "I walked in myself. Been a while since I had something worth standing for." Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she reached out, her hand resting on his arm. Just a touch, but it sent a jolt through him, warm and steady. He covered her hand with his, feeling the tremor in her fingers, and for a moment, the world shrank to just them, the fire, the quiet. Then a sound cut through, an engine, distant but growing closer. Caleb tensed, standing to peer out the window. Headlights flashed through the trees, too deliberate for a lost traveler. "Stay here," he said, grabbing a flashlight from the table. "Caleb," Nora started, but he held up a hand. "Probably nothing. Hunters, maybe. I'll check it out." He stepped onto the porch, the cold biting at his skin, and clicked on the flashlight. The beam caught a black SUV parked 100 yards down the trail, its engine idling. Two men climbed out, tall, suited, moving with purpose. Caleb's gut clenched. Not hunters. He slipped back inside, locking the door. "They found us," he said, keeping his voice low. "Don't know how, but they did." Nora's face drained of color. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have—" "No time for that." He grabbed the lantern, dimming it. "There's a back door through the bedroom. Leads to the creek. We'll lose them in the woods." She nodded, scrambling for her bag. Caleb led her through the cabin, his mind racing. He didn't know these men, didn't know what they'd do if they caught her, but he'd be damned if he let them try. They slipped out the back just as a fist pounded on the front door, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. The creek glittered under the moon, its banks slick with moss. Caleb took Nora's hand, guiding her into the trees, their breaths clouding in the night air. Behind them, the cabin door splintered open, and voices, sharp, commanding, filled the space they'd left behind. They ran, the pines closing around them like a shield, and Caleb felt her grip tighten, her trust in him absolute. Whatever came next, he'd protect her, not because she was Eleanor Grayson, but because she was Nora, and she'd lit something in him he couldn't let go out. The forest swallowed them whole, a labyrinth of pine and shadow stretching endlessly under the pale moonlight. Caleb led the way, his flashlight beam darting between trees, illuminating the slick moss and tangled roots that threatened to trip them. Nora's hand was tight in his, her breathing ragged but determined as they pushed deeper into the woods. Behind them, the faint echo of boots crunching gravel and muffled shouts drifted from the cabin, a reminder that safety was temporary, a fragile thing they'd have to fight to keep. Caleb's mind raced as fast as his feet. He knew these woods, had hunted here with his father decades ago, fished the creek with Ellen in happier times. But darkness changed everything. The trail he'd planned to take was overgrown, barely a suggestion now, and the men behind them weren't amateurs. They'd found the cabin too fast, too precisely. Someone had tipped them off, or worse, they'd been tracking her longer than she'd realized. "Keep low," he whispered, pulling Nora behind a thick trunk as the flashlight beams from their pursuers flickered through the trees. She nodded, crouching beside him, her eyes wide but steady. The locket hung around her neck now, a glinting secret she'd stopped hiding. "How'd they find us?" she asked, her voice a hushed tremor. "Don't know," Caleb said, peering around the tree. "But we're not sticking around to ask." He scanned the terrain, spotting a faint dip in the ground ahead. The creek bed, dry this time of year. "There, we'll follow it west. Throws 'em off our scent." She didn't hesitate, falling into step as he guided her down the slope. The creek bed was narrow, its banks steep and crumbling, but it offered cover, low branches and overhanging ferns shielding them from view. They moved quickly, the cold biting through their clothes, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears. After what felt like miles but was likely less, Caleb slowed, his chest heaving. The sounds of pursuit had faded, swallowed by the forest's vastness. He clicked off the flashlight, letting their eyes adjust to the dim glow of the moon filtering through the canopy. "Think we lost him," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "For now." Nora leaned against a boulder, catching her breath. "I'm sorry, Caleb," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to bring this to you." He shook his head, stepping closer. "Stop that. You didn't bring anything I didn't choose to take on. We're in this together, Nora. You hear me?" Her eyes shimmered and she nodded, brushing a tear away with the back of her hand. "I hear you." He reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder, and she didn't pull back. The touch grounded them both, a tether in the chaos. "Good," he said. "Now we need a plan. Can't run forever." She straightened, resolve hardening her features. "I know. I've been running too long already. Maybe it's time I stop." "Stop how?" he asked, wary. "Face them," she said. "My dad, my uncles. They won't let go until I do. But I can't do it alone." "You're not alone," he said, his voice rough with certainty. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." She looked at him then, really looked, and something shifted in her gaze, a spark of trust blooming into something deeper. Before she could reply, a rustle in the bushes snapped them back to the moment. Caleb spun, raising the flashlight, but it was just a deer, its eyes glinting before it bolted into the dark. "False alarm," he muttered, relaxing slightly. "Come on. There's an old ranger shed a mile up. We'll hole up there till morning." The shed was more a ruin than a refuge. 4 walls of weathered wood, a sagging roof, and a door that creaked on rusted hinges. But it was dry, hidden by thick undergrowth, and it had a small stove in the corner. Caleb built a fire with twigs and a few logs stacked inside, the flames casting a faint warmth over the cramped space. Nora sat cross-legged on the floor, her bag beside her, and pulled out the notebook he'd seen spill from it that first night. "What's that?" he asked, nodding at it as he fed the fire. She hesitated, then opened it, revealing pages of tight, careful handwriting. "Letters," she said, "to my mom. I started writing them after she died. Never sent them, obviously. Just kept them." Caleb sat beside her, the firelight dancing across his face. "What do they say?" "Everything," she said softly. "How much I miss her. How I hate what our family became. How I wish I'd been braver." She flipped to a page near the end, her voice trembling as she read aloud. "I found someone today, Mom. Someone kind. He fixes things. Lanterns, lives, maybe even me. I don't know if I deserve it, but I want to try." Caleb's throat tightened. "When'd you write that?" "2 nights ago," she said, closing the book. "After we finished the box." He didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. Just reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, and they sat like that, the fire crackling, the night pressing in. It wasn't romance. Not yet, but it was something real, something neither could deny. The quiet didn't last. A beam of light sliced through the shed's cracked window, followed by the low growl of an engine. Caleb cursed under his breath, pulling Nora to her feet. "They're back," he said, peering out. The SUV was closer now, its headlights sweeping the woods. How? Nora whispered, panic rising. Doesn't matter. He grabbed the flashlight, dimming the fire with a handful of dirt. We go deeper. There's a ravine half a mile out, steep, hard to track. They won't follow us there. She nodded, clutching the notebook to her chest. They slipped out the back, the cold slapping their faces as they plunged into the trees again. The ravine was a jagged scar in the earth, its edges lined with jagged rocks. Caleb helped Nora down, his hands steady on her waist, and they pressed against the damp stone, listening as the engine faded into the distance. They're gone, he said after a tense minute, his breath clouding in the air. For now. Nora shivered, pressing closer to him. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible, for not giving up on me. He wrapped an arm around her, the weight of her trust sinking into him. Never will, he said, and meant it. The night stretched on, cold and uncertain, but in that ravine, huddled together against the world, Caleb felt a fire kindle inside him, a flame he hadn't known he still had. Whatever came next, he'd keep it burning. For her, for them. Dawn crept over the Oregon coast, a slow bloom of pink and gold spilling across the treetops. Caleb and Nora emerged from the ravine as the first rays pierced the forest, their clothes damp with dew, their faces etched with exhaustion but alive with something new. Resolve, perhaps, or the quiet strength born from facing the dark together. The night had been a gauntlet, a relentless dance of flight and fear, but they'd made it through hand in hand, and now the world felt different, softer, as if it had taken a breath alongside them. Caleb led the way back toward the cabin, his steps sure despite the ache in his legs. The SUV was gone, its tire tracks the only trace of their pursuers, swallowed by the morning mist. He didn't know how long they'd stay away, hours, maybe days, but he knew they'd be back. Nora knew it too. Her silence as they approached the cabin wasn't defeat. It was contemplation, a gathering of courage he could feel in the way she squared her shoulders. Inside, the fire had died to embers, but the air still held a trace of warmth. Caleb set the flashlight down, turning to her. We can't keep running, he said, his voice low but steady. You said you're ready to face them. Tell me what that looks like. Nora set her bag on the table, pulling out the notebook and the locket. She ran her thumb over the silver, then looked up at him, her eyes clear despite the shadows beneath them. It means going back, she said, to Portland, to the lawyers, the estate, everything I ran from. I can't hide forever, Caleb. Not if I want to be free. He nodded, though his chest tightened at the thought of her leaving. And your family? They'll fight me, she said, but I've got something they don't. Grandpa's will. He made it ironclad. If I take control, I can dismantle it, sell it off, give it away, whatever it takes to stop them from using it to hurt each other. Or me. Caleb leaned against the wall, processing. That's a hell of a move. You sure you're up for it? No, she admitted, a faint smile tugging at her lips. But I'm tired of being afraid. And I'm not doing it alone, right? Right, he said, stepping closer. I meant what I said, Nora. I'm with you. Her smile grew, and she reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. Then let's go home first. To Willow Cove. I need to say goodbye properly. Pack up, figure out the next step. With you. The drive back was quiet, the truck's hum a steady heartbeat beneath the sunrise. When they reached Willow Cove, the town was stirring. Fishermen heading to the docks, smoke curling from chimneys. Pete met them at the house, his face a mix of relief and worry. Thought you'd gotten lost out there, he said, clapping Caleb's shoulder. Those suits left an hour ago. Looked pissed. They'll be back, Caleb said. But we've got a plan. Pete raised an eyebrow, glancing at Nora. You finally tell him who you are, kid? Yeah, she said, meeting his gaze. Eleanor Grayson. Nice to meet you, officially. Pete chuckled. Hell of a secret. You're lucky this one's a soft touch. He nodded at Caleb, then headed off, promising to keep an eye out. Inside, Nora packed her few belongings, pausing to run her fingers over the cedar box on the counter. This was the first thing I ever made, she said, her voice soft. With you. Won't be the last. Caleb replied, his tone carrying a promise he hadn't fully voiced until now. She looked at him, her eyes bright with something unspoken, and then she stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him. It was a hug, simple, fierce, and he held her back, feeling the weight of the past week melt into something warmer, something whole. When she pulled away, her cheeks were flushed, but her smile was steady. "Let's finish this," she said. 2 days later, they stood in a sleek Portland law office, the city skyline sprawling beyond the glass walls. Nora wore a borrowed blazer from Caleb's closet, too big but somehow right, and he stayed by her side, a quiet pillar in his faded jacket. The lawyers, sharp-eyed, expensive, laid out the Grayson estate, properties, investments, a fortune that could buy half the coast. Her father and uncle sat across the table, their faces a gallery of fury and disbelief as she outlined her terms. Sell it all, donate the proceeds to shelters, schools, communities like Willow Cove. "You can't do this," her father snapped, his voice cold. "It's ours." "It's mine," Nora said, calm but unyielding, the locket gleaming at her throat. "Grandpa gave it to me, and I'm done letting it destroy us." The argument raged, but the will held firm. Henry Grayson's foresight, a shield she wielded with grace. Caleb watched her, pride swelling in his chest. She wasn't the scared girl from the storm anymore. She was a force, steady and sure, and he'd helped her find that. When it was over, the papers signed, the estate dissolved, they walked out into the crisp Portland air, free. Nora turned to him, her eyes shining. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said. "You could have," he replied, grinning, "but I'm glad you didn't." She laughed, and then she kissed him. Soft, sudden, a spark that lit up every corner of him. He kissed her back, the world fading to just them, the taste of salt and hope on their lips. Back in Willow Cove, life settled into a new rhythm. Nora stayed, not as a runaway but as a partner. They opened a small shop by the pier, selling lanterns and wooden boxes, each one a story of second chances. The townsfolk embraced her, Pete chief among them, and the cedar box became a fixture behind the counter, holding their keys, their dreams. One evening, as winter gave way to spring, they stood on the beach, the pier lantern glowing in the distance. Caleb handed Nora a new lantern, small, handmade, its glass etched with a spiral shell. "For you," he said, "to carry your light." She took it, tears brimming but happy. "And you're mine," she said, leaning into him. They lit it together, its flame dancing against the dusk, a beacon of all they'd built. Love, trust, a life reclaimed from the ashes. The ocean stretched before them, endless and alive, and Caleb knew this was it. Not an ending, but a beginning, bright and enduring. Somewhere Ellen smiled. Somewhere Henry Grayson did too. And in that light, Caleb and Nora carried on, keepers of a flame that would never go out. No. And there you have it, the flame of Caleb and Nora's journey, burning bright against all odds. I'd love to hear from you now. Where are you tuning in from? Are you watching from a cozy coastal town like Willow Cove? Or maybe a bustling city across the miles? Drop a comment below. I'm curious to know who's sharing this story with me. If their light touched you even a little, why not subscribe? It's a simple click to keep the spark alive with more tales like this, delivered right to you. No pressure, just a warm invite to join the journey. And finally, thank you, truly, for watching. Your time and heart mean the world, and I'm so grateful you spent it here with the Keeper of the Flame. Until next time, keep your own light shining.